Welcome back. In this episode, I would like to take a look at the power steering fluid flush or exchange, however you would like to call it. So I looked around and I found the oldest, crustiest, crappiest truck that I have in this shop, and it would be this lovely 1973 Chevrolet, I think, I don't know, the girl's missing, C20 two-wheel drive. So the power steering flush, I think, is fairly straightforward no matter what vehicle you work on. All we're basically going to do is we're going to intercept the fluid on its way back to the reservoir. So we're not going to tie into any of the pressure sides of this system. We're simply going to drain the reservoir. We're going to plug the inlet to the reservoir, and then we're going to direct the fluid flow from the cooler, which I don't think this truck has, back into some sort of a catch pan or something like that. We'll add our fresh fluid into the reservoir, and then the old fluid obviously never, technically, theoretically, hopefully, never gets to touch. The fluid should never mingle, if you will. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's do a fluid inspection first. So let's go ahead and begin with a quality sample, obviously not a sponsor. And let's just see what some fresh oil looks like. So kind of like, I guess if I was to describe the color, I would say corn oil, vegetable oil colored. And let's go ahead and take a fluid sample here from our reservoir here. Oh, lovely. Clearly that looks like used motor oil. Oh, and it's like hardly even on the dipstick. It's actually not on the dipstick. Okay, lovely. Let's take a look at the performance of these fluids. So people ask, hey, how often should I do this? How often should I perform this flush? Probably, I don't know, 50,000 miles or so would be a normal amount. So what am I doing here? Well, aside from noticing a copious amount of black crap in the pump reservoir, probably because the pump's dying, you're gonna notice that this oil here spread out. It's really absorbing into the paper, and this oil here, really, despite however much I choose to put on there, really doesn't wick worth a turd. So that is one of the reasons why we would want to change this fluid, aside from the absolutely terrible smell of death that this happens to have. It just doesn't absorb. The oil is oxidized, the oil is broke down. I mean, it doesn't lubricate the way that it's supposed to. It doesn't condition the seals. It doesn't perform the way it's intended. So that's obvious just even in the napkin test here. Plus, I mean, I've seen used motor oil, it's cleaner than this. So yeah, let's go ahead and proceed with the flush. Let's just say the customer agrees to have their power steering fluid flushed. Right, so first things first is we are going to drain the power steering fluid reservoir. Not that there's anything in it. We're gonna use the Mighty Vac or a turkey baster and see if we can even get anything out of it. Whoa, that surprises me. And that's all she's got. So we'll just poke it into a little bit of a different spot. We're not gonna get it all, but we can get some, if you will. Better than none. So a turkey baster with a little tube on the end would work swimmingly well. We're just going to plug the end because, you know, we don't want to make a mess of this engine bay. All right, we'll just chisel away the dirt. Looks like a standard hose clamp on this. So what, 5/16? Maybe. Hopefully it's not all like stripped out, destroyed. But what we're going to do is we're going to back this clamp out. I might replace this old style clamp with a different one just because this one looks a little bit chowdered up. But this is the return line, is why we are disconnecting it from the reservoir. So it's not really under any pressure. I suppose we could disconnect it here at the steering gear. It may be easier. 99.9% of these are supposed to have a power steering fluid cooler on it. I'm sure, don't know how. This one got a hole in it, and the customer just deleted it, which probably accounts for why the fluid looks the way that it does. So you can see that again on this diagram that I'll throw up on the screen here for you. Pretty similar no matter what vehicle you're working on as far as what it is that you're looking for. So we're going to turn this clamp till it gets loose, and that is the case here. Then we're going to put a catch pan underneath it, and this truck doesn't really have anything underneath it, but if there was like a splash shield or something like that, you would want to cram this fairly full of rags and towels so that you don't have a perpetual oil leak that's not actually an oil leak, and a comeback and things like that. So probably not going to worry about that too much on this truck, because it literally leaks every single fluid you could ever have in a vehicle, and it's not really going back to a customer. So let me grab something to slide that hose off. Approximately there should be good. So now with that accomplished, we're simply going to pry gently, because we don't want to break anything here. Hopefully we can get rid of this hose clamp first. Looks like the outlet of the pump is actually wanting to bend a little bit. We have to be kind of mindful of that. The hose looks like it's loose. There, it's going. But when you disconnect this, not that you could probably actually see anything with all the dirt on it, power steering fluid is going to drain out whatever's left in that reservoir. So we'll be mindful of that, and you can see that happening, and it actually is drizzling right down the frame. Perfect. That's exactly what we wanted. Our next step is going to be to locate something to plug up the inlet, if you will, to this reservoir. So I think I'm just going to go find me an earplug that should fit in there real nice. All right, cool. It's a 2-pack. Imagine that. Means I can do 2 trucks. So obviously you don't want to forget the little fact that you have an earplug in here. So I'm going to leave the tail end hanging out a little bit. I'm sure they make special plugs at this. As a matter of fact, they actually do. I just don't happen to have any here in the shop. So you can see that plugs that hole up quite nicely, steams the leak, if you will. Our next target, wherever it went, right here, is I'm going to trade this hose clamp out by literally just pulling this off, I think, maybe. Hey, look at that. It's got a slot, man. Nice. We'll just casually maybe unscrew that. Wow, that thing is crusty. Oh, hey, sure, now it turns nice. Anyway, get rid of that and install one of these from Napa. Not a sponsor. It's the 705-1370 series. For me, it conveniently comes in a pre-opened package. Should, hopefully, open that sucker up just a little bit. Should slide right on there. Maybe. Like that. Perfect. And we'll put it so that the screw can actually be accessed from your general viewing angle. So what we're going to do next is we're going to get a length of clear tubing just so we can see, how our flush progress is going. You can buy this pretty much at any plumbing supply store. I think it's like the PEX plastic tubing. Just grab a length that fits in here. It comes with my MightyVac fluid extractor, actually, so I don't know the exact diameter of it. Probably could throw a tape measure on that, but that's really neither here nor there. Just kind of depends on the internal diameter, if you will, of the power steering line. So we'll go ahead and get that set up. One end goes in the hose that I just put the new hose clamp on. The other end goes into some sort of a catch pan so that we don't spill any more oil than we already have. Okay, so here is that tubing. Just looking for a place that we can snake that underneath the truck. Kind of like so. We have some stuff in the way here. And grab the end of this guy, gently install that, like that, and tighten the hose clamp down, obviously. Probably could get a smaller screwdriver for this particular edition, but whatever, we're making that happen. You can buy a power steering flush machine, but for the price and for how easy this is, and honestly how easy most vehicles are, I don't see the point. So the end of this tubing again is going to be sort of secured into some sort of a, you know, drain catch pan of some sort underneath the truck. I'll join you down there. Snake that through the handle and orient said pan such that it is off to the side, and I can put a floor jack there, and that this doesn't end up going literally everywhere. So that's good and constrained. I think we're ready to lift the vehicle. So the point behind lifting the vehicle is obviously you really cannot turn the steering wheel with the engine off. It's very difficult. So I'm seeing that hose wanting to fly out of there. Oh well, we will deal with that. But we're actually going to turn the steering wheel to flush this system as opposed to using the engine to provide that function for us. So all the stuff you see draining is water. It's obviously that season here, and I did not pre-pull this truck in. So that's fine, we're getting it done. We are ready to fill the reservoir with fresh power steering fluid. So we didn't use jack stands because we're not actually going to get underneath this truck. Should that jack bleed down, literally nothing is going to happen. So we're just going to fill this guy literally all the way up. I probably shouldn't do long pour, but we're going to fill this babe mostly to the top, all the way. Okay, so you can see how full we filled that. Now if you start the motor, it's probably going to just go absolutely everywhere. Next up, we'll get in the truck and turn the steering wheel. Now we want to get in the truck kind of gently. We don't really want to NASCAR it. Not that this thing will fall apart. Oh, the seat is wet. This seat is really, yeah, it's soaking in. Okay, well now that everything is completely saturated, anyway, so as we turn the steering wheel, which is why we put the floor jack underneath it, we will be circulating fluid through that steering gear and through that reservoir. So I usually do one lock-to-lock operation and stop. Now I'll go refill the oil in that power steering fluid reservoir with fresh clean fluid again, and we'll just keep doing that until the fluid runs clear. We really want to avoid getting any air in the system, which is why I top off sooner rather than later. So how do I know when I'm done? To correctly answer that question, I look at the fluid. When the fluid starts getting nice and clean, not that it's really ever probably going to get clean on a truck like this, but when I see enough improvement and or I've ran the capacity of the power steering system, you can look that up in the AllData, Identifix, whatever you happen to use. When I've ran that capacity through it, I'm going to put the truck back exactly the way that it was before. So before I do that, because when I pull that earplug out of the power steering fluid reservoir, I'm going to lose a bunch of oil. I'm actually going to go just a little bit more on the steering wheel so that I don't make quite as much of a mess. In other words, I'm going to try to pump that reservoir a little emptier than I ordinarily do. The less air we get in it, the better. You're always going to get a little bit of air worked into that steering gear. It's kind of how it works. So you might be tempted to set the truck down at this point, but let's not do that because we still have to bleed the air out of the system. So again, we're gonna pull this back, put everything back exactly the way that it was. We'll let that tube drain as best as we can. So hopefully it makes a little bit less mess. I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of that. And we'll simply wipe that off a little bit. Extract our earplug, slide that back on. Throw the earplug in the garbage. that could be a little awkward should the situation not go well for that. All right, perfect. Tighten that hose clamp down. Everything's nice and fairly snug and secure. Next, we will refill. So for bleeding the system, a little jiggly. For bleeding the system, what we're gonna do is just slowly, with the truck back exactly the way that it was. Don't go too fast, because remember, you're gonna burp air back into that reservoir, which is why we didn't fill it all the way. And that's really gonna make a mess. So we're gonna cycle this wheel lock to lock slowly, probably, I'm gonna say 2 or 3 times to help burp any air out of the steering gear. If we just went ahead and started the engine, we're gonna aerate that fluid. It's different, there's a difference between putting a bubble through a fluid versus whipping it full of air. And that's what we're trying to avoid doing. So again, we're gonna get the system burped, and this is pretty universal to most all power steering systems as far as that's concerned. We'll go ahead, we'll check that level one more time. You can see that's quite a bit cleaner when I wipe it on the rag. We did a good job. We are still at the full cold. I might throw just a smidge more in that. If you got a lot of air in this system through your, if you drained it out a little bit too much in the end, you'll see this level go down quite a bit more. It's pretty common to have to top it off at least once. All right, cool. We're in the middle. So at this point, we'll go ahead and I guess I'll put the cap on it. Maybe I'll leave it off. It doesn't really matter. But we'll go ahead and start the engine and cycle the steering at this point. So when we start this, it's important, we're just gonna leave the steering alone for a couple of seconds. Do the obligatory shifter jiggle. And this will bleed the lines leading to the steering gear. Right now, the fluid is circulating from the pump through the control valve in the steering gear and through the cooler that this doesn't have, and then back into that reservoir. So once that's done, we'll slowly, because we don't want to get too much air in that reservoir. If you do, it's going to make foam and a big mess again. We're just going to slowly hit that lock to lock, very slowly. There's my lock. You can probably hear the engine dip down a little bit. So while we're turning that, you notice that we're not hearing any whining or screaming or anything like that out of this pump, which means we don't have a bunch of air in it, which is really good because we can give it back to the customer in a quiet state, knowing that the fluid level is correct. So we'll simply center up the steering, shut the engine off, recheck the fluid level. At that point, should be pretty much done. And it looks like we are not currently on the dipstick, so we'll simply put a little bit in there. The fluid has an ever so slight froth on the top, but nothing that's going to cause us any issues. So we are at the full cold, which is good. Perfect. Simply put the dipstick back in and put all our stuff away. You gotta make sure you set her down gently. Don't forget that. Lovely. Next up, what's echoing? Oh, it's the air. We're back in the wet seat express, of course. We're gonna go ahead and take a little toot out around the parking lot just to make sure we have actually provided an improvement in a truck with no clutch left, because that's how we roll. Drive through the slush. Yeah. Oh, come on, baby. Yeah. We're dealing with major powerhouse here. So we can lose the fast idle. Perfect. Little double clutch because we have literally no synchros left in this thing. Find it, there. Found it, yeah. We will also make sure we get a couple of lock-to-locks. Underload. God, I feel like the steering on this truck's gonna fall apart. Might be time for a little suspension checkup on it. But anyway, let's make sure we get all the air out of everything. Well, there you got it, folks. That is how you change your power steering fluid on pretty much any vehicle with a setup similar to this, being like one with an actual hydraulic power steering pump. They're kind of a dying breed, just depending on what it is that you're working on. So this service will not obviously apply to every vehicle out there on the face of this planet, but for the time being, the traditional power steering fluid systems I flush in this particular way. There is a slight deviation from what some manufacturers, I think Ford asks you to cycle the steering and run the pump. Or run the engine rather, which obviously runs the pump. It's not real practical, I don't think, if you're a one-man band, but if you had somebody topping that steering oil off the entire time, it would probably flush a whole heck of a lot faster than what we did here in this presentation. But 6 versus 1/2 dozen, I think we ended up with the same result in the end. Thanks for watching. See you next time.